My name's Brad Harrison. I'm an educational designer here at Learning Futures. Today I'm just going to talk about 360 video, then virtual reality, or VR for short, and augmented reality, or AR for short. So one of the common misconceptions is that VR encapsulates all of these different technologies, which is not necessarily the case. One of the things that we found is that virtual reality is used as an umbrella term. So it doesn't matter what type of experience someone's having, if they consider it VR, they use that terminology, which is not necessarily correct. There is a big difference between what each of these things are, and they all have their unique properties that lend themselves to different situations. The first one that I want to talk to is 360 video. It is definitely the easiest to produce. We're talking about capturing a real-world simulation where your user can choose what it is that they actually want to look at. The user is standing essentially in the middle of a sphere, and they're able to look around, not necessarily interact with anything. With augmented reality, you have a view of the physical or the real world, and there are elements within that world that you're now looking at that aren't there for everyone else to see. So there might be a building that you're thinking about constructing that can physically be sitting on the site for you to look at, walk around and appreciate from different angles. Augmented reality allows producers of content in general to be able to deliver information to you in a contextual way. Google is becoming smarter with how they deal with image recognition. In the future, it's possible to walk up to something, look at it, and it will tell you what the object is. It can then overlay other information. You could break an object apart. You could do all sorts of different things with that object in a physical space. Virtual reality is the most immersive of the three technologies. Google Earth is a great example because it's something that you can use on a phone, on a tablet, on your computer, but it can also be used in a virtual reality headset. Now, why would you want to use Google Earth in a virtual reality situation? If I can use it on my phone, it's something I can just pull out, I can look at, I can move around, and I can get on with my day. The reasons for experiencing something in virtual reality is so that you can experience something you can't necessarily get in traditional forms of media. Now, Google Earth has the ability to draw things in not only 2D as a flat plane, but also using scans where they can show building profiles, there's topography. So you can go to Mount Everest and you can be standing there at the top of the mountain, and you can look around and get a real sense and a feel for what people who have journeyed up there would have been seeing. You can then transport yourself into China and you can get a feel for all of the land and the distance as you're traveling around different parts of the world. I know that personally, when I was going through Google Earth, I learned a lot about where things were in relation to where I thought they were in my mind, and distances between big cities and even within a single country, just how far apart these places can be. Other instances that you would potentially want to use VR in are dangerous situations that you can't expose your user to without presenting them with a clear and present danger or imposing one on the population. An example of this would be a power plant. So let's say we've got to go to a nuclear power plant and we want to teach someone all the ins and outs of how to make nuclear power. Well, in a VR space, we can go through and we can have panels that people can play around with. They can jostle little things around with not necessarily understanding what they're doing to start with, learning through making a problem and then trying to fix it. But at the end of the day, if you were to take them to a real power plant, there would probably be a decent chance of a Chernobyl. So we want them to be able to go through an experiment, learn through failing, teach them about the different options that they have and what each of these things are and how to do it correctly, and for them to iterate and to test and to experiment, but in a safe environment, but still one that's very immersive. So out of the three technologies, the very first one, 360 video and images, is the one that's most accessible to most people. It has the easiest entry level when it comes to technology. It's one of those things that generally, if you can go and capture that image, then you can transport it into a 360 platform with not a lot of effort or technical know-how. Virtual reality seems to be the one that people run to the most when we're talking about immersive learning and technologies that can be used. A group of people from the School of Nursing were looking at implementing a program that would allow their students to go through and see what it was like to look after a patient before they actually touched anyone physically or went out and did any of their prac work. The idea was to create a group of small interactives that built experience levels in things that they wouldn't normally be able to do. Now, by no means does the virtual experience replace that of actually doing something physically and in practice with a real person, but it helps to build that muscle memory, learn a few of the mistakes that people will generally make when they're first starting off down this path, and hopefully then have confidence and be able to move ahead. The way that we were going about that was to build a couple of small interactives. The first one was for placing an IV into a vein. So the user would put on the VR headset, and then using their controller, they would be pinpointing the target that they were after in order to correctly place the IV. So when you're doing things like this, designing an interaction for something that's quite clunky, like the controllers are quite large, they're not a needle, let's point it that way. But using some design techniques, like you put a big bubble on the virtual hand as a target point, and then as the needle is getting closer and closer to that, you start to shrink down that target point. And so then people who are able to hold that line longer are getting a larger percentage or a bigger score, meaning that they're more on track to be able to actually put the drip in. Because at the end of the day, if you want to simulate people moving around a little bit, all these situations that can come up as people are watching an IV get placed, or as they're feeling the pinch, that's things that you can add into the mix to make it a more realistic experience. And also, it just gets these students thinking about the fact that these things can happen and what they need to do to help calm and allay the fears of a person. So the actual physical act is one part of it, but there's a whole slew of other little things that you can add into that virtual experience to try and make it a more realistic and therefore effective learning product.